we will provide this to you all, the family and the friends and things. Okay, go on.
I'm sorry, I can't repeat all that.
No, you don't have to repeat it. We're going to go on from here, but if you found that picture, that would be great.
In a moment.
No problem at all.
And we need that original photo you showed of everyone.
The ILDA meeting?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I will forward that to Patrick and he can put it on the site or whatever.
Thank you.
One of the
And
lovely things.
there was another photo that the family doesn't have that's just a photo of Fred and is a really amazing photo. And I don't even think my mom had ever seen it.
You know, Faith, I possibly, I might give my husband credit for that because he's been the portrait photographer of our community for a while. And for all the image engineering people who are on here, we have a job to do to collect his other portraits, but that was his talent. And I'm absolutely, you will get, you know, that print and I will make copies. But I believe it might have been Walter Gundy's shot. So there.
Yeah.
And, you know, that goes to say something a bit about memorabilia and nostalgia to this group too, where I feel like I finally understand that there's an appreciative audience for all the work that was done previously, and that there is a sizable amount of documentation and memorabilia that perhaps ILDA might have some resources to connect and collaborate. Oh, I love this one, our brochure. I had a thought, and perhaps while I have everybody's ear, that I'm going to put out there, which is to say that to gather this association in person, again, seems like a wonderful ambition, but I'm sure that there are costs that are involved for people who are scattered all over the world, and that it might help you to raise some funds to give some, you know, scholarships or support or whatever, especially for younger people who would want to get together and be part of this industry association. So if it would be of interest to have, say, an auction of image engineering memorabilia, I have a fair amount of it on hand that I would be more than happy to, you know, put up. And this is physical materials, right? Copies of brochures or slides, or now and then some devices that might be worth a fundraising opportunity. Just putting it out there.
Sorry, I think one of our members, if Mike Dunn is on, are you sitting next to an IEC machine? Mike Dunn?
I have some IEC gear in the rack next to me, a couple of DV encoders and decoders. And I know where there's a whole bunch of other IEC stuff here locally.
Okay, well,
like vintage stuff.
We'll get this. Let me get back to Jen's screen. I think she got the pictures you wanted.
That's a PMR 12C from Laser Displays, I'm pretty sure, and it stood for programmable, manually controlled with a rotator, 12 image cards, and color.
Wow.
Scott, this is George Whittinghill here.
Hey, George.
Must admit, I'm impressed that you remembered that.
It made a big impression on me.
Yeah, it's a long, long time ago. Anyway, I'm delighted to see you and Jenny here after such a long time. And Judith is here as well. And we were touched that John reached out and let us know this was happening. I still have some of Fred's gear out of the Fred van that I have in my garage. I look at occasionally and have fond memories of. And Judith has brochures from Image, of course, and that memorabilia. But no, Fred was just really remarkable friend, and I never got over missing him, because sense of humor, his kindness, his brilliance, and his quirkiness were just kind of unmatched. Just an example I'd like to share with the group is that when he bought the original Fred van, he wanted to put a manual 4-speed into it. And he thought about the engineering and how to do this properly. And pardon me. And he finally settled on a solution that had a reverse H pattern, because it's the only one that he could implement. And no one else could properly drive that without completely rearranging their brain. It was just hilarious. And I remember also he was unsatisfied with the voltage regulator on his car. I mean, how many hundreds of millions of units are there out there in the world? So he just redesigned one and said, this is better. And he gave me one for my Mustang, which I still have to this day. And so many other fun little devices and just flashes of brilliance, and all analog, of course. You could not say digital in front of him. He would, you know, just reprimand you if you did. But just such a lovely friend, and Judith and I have missed him dearly over all these years, and to see all you guys here again after this time is cathartic and just really wonderful. So I thank you for that.
I hear it, George. At the same time, I want to say, I think he ultimately, you know, bowed to and came up with the first digital recorder we had that used video tapes. So essentially he was taking an analog medium, magnetic tape, and storing the digital media on it for us, which of course meant we had to have decoders for that. And this is in an era in which, you know, memory units were horrifically expensive. So magnetic tape was what you needed to have. Unfortunately, it's hard to decode it now, but it was still a remarkable thing. And I also will say to, you know, this group that I have Fred devices in my basement as well, which I cherish. But, you know, may need a better place to live. But everyone who used them will remember that they had wooden side panels.
Yes.
That his aesthetic was right, that we would put. So let me show you one other image from our early days, and anyone who needs a copy of this can get to me and say, you know, here we were in, I would say, 1981, because I was pregnant. And at the bottom here, you'll see Glen Heinmiller on the left, Walter Gundy in the middle, Krista Lasias in the center, Cathy Pate above Krista. To her left, our partner, Peter Wolf, who was a founder, also missed. We lost him years ago. Me, there's an individual next to me. I need help identifying. She looks lovely.
Betsy,
Next,
yeah.
Betsy.
Yeah.
Betsy Cross. Betsy Cross.
Betsy Hodgson.
Hodgson. Who's Betsy?
Okay, I knew I'd get it out of here. Wow. All right. And then Brian Hemberger. And then, of course, upper left is Fred. And then moving to the right, John Campbell, Jeff O'Neill, Rick Campbell, Eric Eisack, and Donna Curtis. And, you know, many more involved. We have another set, but I wanted to say that anyone who wants this is welcome to a copy. It was a formative time. And one thing I'm sorry to say is that I don't have a ton of pictures of our, you know, shows and output, but tonight's shows were so, you know, kind of astonishing. I started feeling like, wow, you know, we did a lot, but we were just, you know, the tip of the iceberg for what is being created here. Is that Glen on the screen? Oh, it is. Okay, come on. Open your mic, man.
Ah. Wow.
Yes, yes.
Glenn, we can't hear you because I muted you. Can you unmute again? Sorry about that.
Sorry. I think this was our first T-shirt because it had our slogan, "The Brilliant
Yeah.
Solution."
Yes. You know, you can get comforters made out of those if you really want to know what to do with them. Okay. Hi, Judith.
Jenny,
Hi,
this is
Jenny.
what I was going to wear. I still bring it out every once in a while.
Wow.
Oh, the original jacket. Yeah, I got the second generation. I got both, actually. I dug this one out. Yep. And then the new one, well, it doesn't matter. Nobody cares.
Yeah.
I have a Fred story, since I sort of have the bike here, which is really brief, which is the one thing I remember about Fred. And we still, I've still joked about it with my wife, Cathy. It's like, we'd have a problem with gear, you know. I mean, it was as Scott said, it was highly reliable for the day, but there were sometimes problems, especially since we were dragging it all over the world, banging on it. And we'd be back in the office and we'd be trying to get something to work. And we said, Fred, we can't get it to work. Come on over here. And Fred would come over and he would just touch the equipment, his equipment. He would just touch it. I swear, he would just touch it and it would work. So we called that the Fred finger, because all he had to do was place his finger on the equipment and it would work properly. The Fred finger. We depended on the Fred finger.
Or even the Fred field. Sometimes
The
you
Fred
didn't even
field.
have
Okay.
touch. Right.
That's right. You didn't touch.
Get nearby. I was calling on Fred this morning as I work occasionally as a Zoom moderator for a small church. And I'll tell you, it's like being backstage again. It's like, how many audio channels and how many whatever. And I stop and breathe and say, you know, is it turned on? Is it plugged in? Is it? That was Fred's mantra. How do you troubleshoot?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
One of my favorite memories is we got to go to the Fenning family for Thanksgiving. And we drove up in a freezing winter to Binghamton in the Fred van. And nothing could have been more charming than to get to see his home and his family. It was like something out of a book. And his parents were delightful. The home itself was so cozy, with a big landing on the second story and all the bedrooms flanking that big landing. And the kids each lined up with a project for Fred to fix, something that was broken, that they'd been waiting for him to come home and fix. And this adorable queue of broken toys and electronics, and that he would just fix one by one by one. And I felt it was one of my most favorite Thanksgivings of all times. It was like finding out the Waltons are real people. It was magical. It was just the most wonderful family, capable parents, and I felt so lucky to get a glimpse into it. It was very special.
Well, Judith, I can tell you that Fred appreciated that family too. He didn't, brag about it or anything, but he left little
Yes.
notices and comments that we all kind of
Yeah.
knew. That was very.
Each one of them
touching.
held his heart. He just loved it. And he was very proud of it. And it was such a surprise if you knew him as a tech guy. You would have never guessed there was this immense family background that just made him who he was. It was wonderful.
Well,
But
for
I'm
the,
wondering how all these things that people have escaped kludge hinge. Because isn't that weird?
Kludge hinge. Oh my God.
Yes.
Yeah, and he labeled his files as items and stuff. Remember that?
Yeah,
I
it's
actually remember somebody talking about that. There's stuff 1, stuff 2.
Oh,
As someone fresh out of school who had to, figure out his filing system in the shop, the flow bins of stuff was like an adventure. You'd find flow bins. The easy ones were things that grab and cut and screw. It was the ones marked dead flies and goof plugs. Those were the fun ones, right? And sometimes there was legitimately useful stuff in there, and sometimes there was literally dead flies. So you never knew what to expect. But my favorite goof plug moment for Fred, because you all make mistakes, right? When you're cutting things by hand and you have one shot at a perfect silk screen before it has to go on a show, and sometimes you cut a hole too many. So we would plug it with a goof plug or something, right? It's what you do. But sometimes his sense of humor would get the most of him, and he would put a switch or a button in that hole with no wires coming out the other side. And sometimes he would even put a label on it that said, "Don't press this button." And out it would go on a show. And some poor customer would look over the shoulder of the operator and freak out because there was this button right there that anyone could press. What if they press that button? Awesome.
when he was working for us, he built a system for Boeing, and there was a button that was labeled "Make it so" out of Star Trek in the factory at Boeing.
Hey, Scott, I had to get on a train and bring an axle to upstate New York.
Oh my God.
Fred took his motorcycle and met me up there. I think he had left the van. They had loaded it down with all kinds of equipment. I think they were coming from somewhere upstate New York anyway, but the axle broke in the van. So I'm on the train, freezing cold out. We're laying in some strange person's driveway. We're counting splines, trying to put the thing together. And I had to drive that thing home with him because he was so exhausted after we went up there. But within about 2 or 3 days of it being parked back at 10 Beacon Street, there was a piece of tape added to the dashboard. And on the piece of duct tape, there was a little rectangle, and it was supposed to represent the little rectangular push button switch. And it was labeled "Broken Axle Warning Light." I don't remember how it got there, but that piece of tape lived on the dashboard of the Fred van until the day that he took it to Nissenbaum's and had it squished.
Well, John,
he took pictures.
I got pictures of that. Yeah. Eric and I.
But that broken axle was because, Jenny, correct me if I'm wrong, we were on the way for one of our first actual contracts, I think, to do a demo in Tarrytown or somewhere. And we were so poor, we couldn't rent a truck. So we used the Fred van, and we loaded it up with so much crap that we broke the axle.
Yeah.
Fortunately, we weren't very far from the destination. Somehow we pulled off the demo. Jenny, do you remember? I think it was you and I and
oh my God.
well, Fred must have gone. Fred must have been driving the van.
No, well, Fred may have been there, but he came back into Boston because he actually gave me the package with 1/2 of the axle system to take on. I got on the train with just a box and a bag with some overnight clothes, and we were laying in the driveway for, I don't know, 5 or 6 hours dismantling the rear end of his vehicle so that we could drive it back to Boston. And we got it about 3 or 4 o'clock that, that evening or the next morning, we were driving back into Somerville. So, but yeah.
It was
I remember, Scott,
Yeah.
it makes me think of the laser displays gigs where we'd rent a station wagon. None of you young kids know what a station wagon is. And we would load it up with the laser projector and all the gear. And then there wasn't enough room for all the water hoses. So we'd strap the water hoses to the
On the
roof
roof.
rack of it
Yeah.
and drive to Florida. I remember the first guy I drove to Florida.
Hey, remember when the radio station in Boston?
Oh, that was great. That was
Oh,
great.
the Fred van was a key point. I mean, without the Fred van, we wouldn't have been able to. I mean, we had I think Brian Hemberger brought in a water mattress that we laid
Right.
out in the bed of the Fred van, and we filled it to more than capacities. And then we drove the van to the roof of the garage, and we were using 55-gallon pails to recycle the water, hoping that it would cool fast enough that we could keep back through the lasers again. We won though.
John, you should,
Fred
John,
Van,
explain what that was.
One of the radio stations wanted, they had, there were people, the contest was, the winners will get $500 if you can display our logo, like WGBH, whatever the station was. It was a radio station, but they wanted to see that. So there were people like laying out blankets on the seat. We're looking down on all this. We're laughing like, ha, 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 ha. The most ironic part is that totally illegal. And where did we project it? Right on the side of the Massachusetts Eye and Ear Hospital. So
It's
but
true.
we won.
the Fred
Okay,
van was painted orange, particularly because Fred could drive it around Boston and park it wherever he wanted, and because it looked like an official van color, he never got a ticket. But I did get a ticket for Fred van about 15 years after Fred's death. Someone had kept his license plate and was driving around in their car with the Fred van license plate, and he got a ticket, and I got it many years later, but he never did.
Oh my Lord, that's great. I want to follow up on the button story, because the one we often tell is about this event. I'm going to try to put this on.
Oh, yes.
I
Yes.
remember this story.
Remember, whoa, you can't see it, the reflections, but the Statue of Liberty. Yeah.
Oh,
Picture
yeah.
that's we had that at the office. I remember that one.
So, the big deal was Ronald Reagan was going to have the big red button to, start the beam that would go across the harbor, boom, the harbor, light up the statue. And the way it was structured, there was a platform with that controller, and underneath it was the projector. Fred's down underneath with the projector. And because we all know that, switches are tricky. And this one had, oh, come on, Rob, you were probably there too, but it was sort of like spring fed. And Ronald Reagan could not quite get it down far enough. So Fred was there, and we believe that Fred actually put the beam out to the harbor because Ronald Reagan couldn't push the button. Am I right? I forget.
I do remember
I
that.
think we intentionally did not have the button actually connected. It was just connected to a light or something under the stage where whoever the operator was, probably Fred, would then actually press the real button. But
I like the original version of that story.
yeah, I do too. Much better. Much better.
Yeah.
Because for years I didn't fear nuclear war because I knew he had no strength to push the button. I said,
That was the
Told us
concept.
it was him that pressed the button. It was a dummy button that Ronald Reagan pushed.
Well, yeah, but that's our
You know,
favorite button.
the broken axle story reminds me, I actually broke the suspension in my car on the very first week on the job at Image Engineering, lugging dimming gear to an orchestral show at Castle Hill. So it was a genuine problem back then because all that crap was so bloody heavy. I was just looking at a picture of the Little Mermaid projector for Disney, right? there weren't a lot of laser effects in that show at the end of the day, but the projector was the size of a station wagon. And it, you know, it had a whole wall, a massive wall of water systems and cooling and oh my God, it was crazy. The amount of stuff that you had to lug around to
Oh,
do
yeah.
the simplest effect.
And we would air freight this stuff too, sometimes to Hawaii. You know, I remember we'd have them bring a air freight container to 10 Beacon. John Campbell, you remember this?
LD11s.
And right, LD11 containers that would fit in
Oh,
a
I know.
DC-10 or something. And Brian Hemberger made these little scale balsa wood blocks that represented all the different road cases. And we would pre-figure out how to put the jigsaw puzzle into the container because you paid by container, I think.
Yeah,
as long as it wasn't.
Does
over a
anybody
certain weight,
else
it's
hear a
crazy.
lot of echoing going on, or is it just me?
I do not.
There's a bit, so most people can mute. Please mute if you're not speaking already.
Well, I'll have to check my system, I guess.
I did have a question for some of the older folks. I remember we went up to Boston and I didn't know if it was image engineering. I didn't know he was in laser display before image engineering, but it was the Boston's first laser light show or something where you had Jiminy Cricket up on the building.
Right.
Oh, yeah, that was Boston's first light.
Custom
We
You
can
and I
tell you-
ran that, Glenn, right?
No, from City, it was projected from a abandoned little room near the mayor's office in City Hall across onto a screen that they put on the side of 60 State Street, because that was Sheraton World Headquarters. And the thing was paid for by Sheraton because the CEO of Sheraton had gone to like Egypt and saw a light show at the pyramids or something and came back and said, I'm going to do that for Boston. That's my recollection. And it's a good story and I'll stick with it.
I'm gonna
Interesting thing, you're going to object? Okay.
Yes. I'm sorry. I don't know. I dealt with an ad agency, so maybe they were funded by that. But I thought the most interesting thing was that for years afterward, there
Well,
were
the mirrors were still
little
up.
black boxes hanging on the facade of Boston City Hall that were beam captures, right? These we did so as to ensure that there was no scattered radiation coming off of the concrete facade that might possibly be, you know, a safety hazard, right? And these boxes were fabricated and with layers of black mesh to somehow absorb laser light. I'm sorry, Scott, but I
No,
thought
that's true. That's true.
Crazy.
You're right.
But I'll tell you the really interesting story, Jenny. Those boxes, I believe, were up there until a couple of years ago, when the firm I am now co-owner of, Lamb Partners Architectural Lighting Design Firm, was commissioned to relight all the City Hall. And when they were up there installing the new lights and what, they took down these boxes. And I remember one of my colleagues going like, yeah, what were those funny things? And I explained to them, and they're like, oh my God.
We used to fire the shot heard round the world manually every night.
Right.
You know,
Right.
it became so automatic. We didn't even have to listen, pay attention, and the first beam would go out and be the shot heard round the world.
Glenn, you didn't save those boxes for posterity?
Well, I don't
You didn't-
think that it was like the electricians or somebody but took them down. I mean, we didn't. Yeah, I wish I asked, I said, what happened? You know, I don't know. So, yeah, I
Those
would have kept one of those.
Those special effects that they were showing during the awards, the early half of that, I believe they referred to it as the Ice Palace, that structure, where they were doing the external facade lighting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
that
really good.
Amazing. You know,
Totally.
having
Laser mapping.
venues, I tell you, I was freezing watching that. I could, you know, I mean, having been on many a roof on the holiday seasons, freezing, I could feel the cold. I mean, I felt like I was there.
John, that's a perfect segue to, I don't know if anybody can see this. This was at the peak of our 1988. We did 5 New Year's Eve shows simultaneously. in 5 cities, all in the northern United States, with water-cooled lasers.
I think.
And John, I'm sure you were on one of them, and I was on one of them, and oh my God.
You know,
Mine was indoors at a mall.
You suck.
Hey, I tell you, it was like Thanksgiving has always been one of my favorite holidays. But when I was working at Image, it seemed like it was at least maybe 14 of the 18 years that I was working for Jennie that I was eating, you know, in a cafeteria style dining area or driving a truck. But you know what? If I had that part of my life to do all over again, I'd do it again, you know?
So I was mentioning earlier that, you know, I was a kid out of school. I was an electrical engineer who was completely overwhelmed by how much smarter Fred was and how much more capable he was. But what was astonishing was his unique lack of fear to try things and to make something happen out of anything. And you guys saw in the photos, sometimes he would test voltages with his skin. You know, he actually helped me replace my old fuse box in my house with circuit breakers. And he came over. We didn't pull the meter. We didn't have the electric company turn the power off. He just did it hot. And he would test things with his one hand in his pocket and one hand out here. And he just, you know, if it sizzled, it was hot. But you know, that being said, he had a tremendous sense of safety nonetheless. He flew us a couple of times in his plane. I never felt more safe flying with him at the time, you know, because he was so, you know, he took such good care of it. He also had a real sense of respect for the mixture of water and high voltage and high current and so forth. So, but he had this unbelievable awareness of what was going on that no one else could see. So, you know, I don't know if you remember when we had to start moving from those tiny little galvanometer mirrors to the big ones for remote scanners, fiber-fed scanners. Nowadays, you just have lots of little projectors, of course, right? But those mirrors were like, you know, half an inch across. And you'd spin those up and the galvanometers would start going into these crazy oscillations. And he would, I think there was a quote in a recent James Bond movie, "You're a kite in a hurricane, Mr. Bond," right? It was like a kite in a hurricane. These things were just spinning and throwing mirrors across the room. And he had so much power going into his scanner amps that he was just tossing mirrors, but he was able to wield that power and control it and put these little oscillation, you know, absorption filters on there to kind of keep those buggers in line. And he would be dialing them in just nice. And then all of a sudden, poof, a mirror would have flying into the wall. But he always had this, he just didn't fear. He would just try it and he would make it work, whether it was making a robot shoot a laser beam at a Cadillac launch show, or making, you know, giant mechanical things appear out of nowhere or whatever. But that was a spirit that, you know, I just couldn't help but learn from. It was inspirational.
Well, Rob, it's great to hear you say it, because it makes me think that sort of fearless attitude or whatever. I mean, it's like Fred and the other founders of image engineering, Jennie and Eric and stuff, no one could tell them that it couldn't be done. If they just said, "I figure it out," you know, it wasn't like, "Oh, how would I do that?" They just never occurred to them that they wouldn't try to do it. And I think that was a great inspiration to the rest of us, like John and myself, who had to actually go out and execute the shows. Like, it was like, okay, we'll figure this out, you know? And I think that kind of attitude that came from Fred.
I just want to say, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just want to say he gave us confidence that way, because we could always go back and ask him, you know, help. And if you asked for help, there was never a rejection. It was always there.
Well, I would come back and ask for another piece of equipment to hook this up to that, or to allow us to do this easier. And Fred would just build something, you know, and it only much later that I realized how ridiculous my request was. Like, who would I think that I could just get this other piece of equipment? Well, he spoiled us, right? I mean, he would just, and Jennie, you know that more than I do, right? You'd be in the studio and you go like, well, I got to figure this out. And Fred, then 2 days later, he'd show up with a box with some wires hanging out of it, right?
That's it. That's the most amazing part about it is basically, you know, by asking him for something, you challenged him. And, you know, look at the switches, the multiple, or the four-way switches. I mean, you know, you needed 5 operators just to do a couple of Q sequences, and you know, 2 weeks later, you've got a 24 button box that basically, you could call it up, preset it by plugging it in a certain way. And, just by knowing what the buttons were. I mean, I tell you, the candid pictures of Fred, I don't know why it is, but, you look at that when he's in deep in thought like that, I think like James Dean or something, I mean, the pictures of him are just amazing. When he's deep in thought, the picture there that you showed of him looking in that rack, I'm like, I mean, he's probably fixed this, he's looking at one problem and he's probably fixed it 3 different ways in his head. He hasn't decided what he's going to do yet. What would benefit him the most? He's just challenged, there were no challenges that I don't think that if you gave him some time that he couldn't accomplish. You just, being around him made me a better person. I've ended up thinking of things a different way just by watching the way he would approach things.
He had an interesting way of naming these devices for what they would do. And one of my favorites that was so creative was Jenny or Andrew would work something up on the hard machine, and they'd need to record it, and they'd need to tweak all the parameters in the animation that were coming out of the hard machine. And so he made a device called Magic Fingers, and it pushed all the buttons on in timing that was set on a machine that was supposed to control slide projectors. And a lot of the great sequences that we had came out of that. So he had Magic Fingers. He had a thing called the kitchen sink, because it had every way of synchronizing things between different devices.
Right. My God,
yeah,
I've forgotten about all this.
Oh, those Magic Fingers was a really cool way to control.
I was watching the awards, the pieces and all the awards, and I was thinking like, the automation, the synchronization of it was so freaking intensely perfect. And I'm thinking like, oh God, I wish we could have done that. I mean, we started to do it. I think the image engineering started purely analog, well, almost purely analog, right? And then gradually was crossing into the digital world. And Fred was like sort of helping us get there by starting to automate manual processes, and then getting us on digital video and getting us so we could have MIDI or SMPTE timecode going into the systems to automate the thing, that we could actually start to get the kinds of synchronization that today seems like just normal with the equipment that people have today, I guess, but it's just fully digital.
That laser banding was pretty amazing looking.
Oh man, yeah.
That was.
Whoever thought of that gets a should hopefully already got an award.
Just because he's not here, I mean, I think everyone saw laser banding, but no one thought it was cool. So that's why the guy who is kind of credited with it is LaBay. So Precision Lasers is his second company. His first company was called Future Weapons, and he went kind of through a rebranding and wanted to change it up. So he's kind of credited with making broken lasers in video cool. Because there's a lot of people who come back and say, oh yeah, we saw that in the 90s, we saw it, and they tried to cover it up, but he took it to another level. He's also known for doing the Windows 10 background. So the background on Windows 10 computers is a laser. It is a live photo of a laser shot at plexiglass with the atmospherics. That's not a CG image on there. So
wow.
Yeah.
I always wondered.
Well, he's super nice. He's in LA. He's a vegan. He's very charismatic. A lot of people gravitate to him, even though he's kind of like a creative, quiet, but very nice person. So yeah, he attended ILDA in 2016 when when New Image Engineering hosted in Baltimore. Oh, there we go. Yeah, there's actually a documentary of how they put that together. So in LA, he just worked with different photographers and videographers, and Precision Lasers did win a couple awards this year, but now banding is kind of stretched to a lot of other companies as well, but he is definitely the forerunner of like how he started the setups, how he got the clients, and used it in different ways.
That's pretty cool.
well, the whole evolution of synchronization, I think, is probably a deep topic to dig into, because we felt a transition from film to video to the medium that we were working in, you know, during the whole period when digitalization was becoming more sophisticated. And, you know, older media and technologies had to combine. So, so I don't know, I'm behind that, and I would love to learn more about how it's evolved, because I agree with Glen that, you know, listening or looking at some of that work, I thought, wow, they can really get this down now. And it does make a huge difference that the music, the sound, and we owe a lot to the musicians who inspired us to make these shows really, you know, have the emotional impact that they have.
Back in the mid-70s, I saw my first touring laser show at the Michigan Theater in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I remember that they had to run garden hoses up and down to the balcony to cool everything off. I was wondering, does anybody here know what company produced that? The roadies had t-shirts that said Laser Dogs. Is that anybody here?
Oh dear, I don't see Mel Drumm here anymore, but
Yeah,
he
that
was
would
our man in
know.
Michigan.
Yeah, he lives in Ann Arbor. He runs the Ann Arbor Hands-On Museum.
I would
that
check
we've done
in
a
with
few
him.
shows for.
Really?
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. Laser Dogs. And that goes back to another comment I just want to say. There was somewhere in the awards tonight where someone said, well, not so many classical music shows. And I was reminded to say, well, we did shows for 10 years running in the music festival in Troy, Michigan, or actually on the campus of Oakland University with a live symphony orchestra. And it was just, I mean, it was delightful. And of course, the Boston Pops did shows occasionally, but classical music was actually one of image engineering's favorite places to explore.
Yeah, they
So.
used to do it in Binghamton. Fred set up everything for the BC Pops was in Binghamton. And he did that for a few years, which was pretty awesome.
Oh yeah, we should get that on the list of accomplishments.
Well, you had a good recording of the Vivaldi seasons too.
Oh God, that set the bar so high. That interpretation was beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm afraid that, you know, the surviving magnetic media, if there is such, is like VHS or whatever, but it was a great marriage of analog, you know, controls with a composition that had all of that metaphorical impact. So yeah, I think it's still a world that you can continue to explore. I want to encourage the younger programmers here to say, oh, you know, dig into that repertoire. There's so much there to work with. It's great.
Yeah, I'd really love to do some classical work. We just did a show with a jazz band that worked out really well. And we're hoping to do some future stuff with that. It was all Lumia and abstracts, and it was a lot of fun. It was very popular.
Jenny, I think one of the best things you did was with that artist from Carabiner it was called Powers of Imagination. And it was sort of inspirational without abstract stuff. I mean, there was a theme and variations in there of the same scene painted in a lot of different ways and augmented with the laser graphics. And there was stuff that went from 2D to 3D with architecture and that sort of thing in there. Say something about that, Jenny.
Well, I can say that some media is ephemeral, you know, it's just the truth. You know, you experience it, you're there, and it doesn't translate into other media. So as much as we, and I think it was said tonight too, as much as we try to capture with cameras and video these shows that are designed for environments, it's not easy. And it's just like, I mean, why do we still have museums where you go to see the original painting and whatever, you know, whatever size it is, in an environment that's not a copy on screen? So The Powers of Imagination was a composition for multiple slide images coordinated with digital controls. These are multi-image slide banks of ectographic projectors, 35mm projectors, with layers of laser projection on top of them, a soundtrack that was primarily musical, I think, but maybe with a little bit of narration. And I can't even tell you absolutely for sure, but what I can tell you is that it was a composition for an environment that can't necessarily be reproduced or captured easily now. And this is maybe leading to, you know, what is the fine art impact of laser technology, and where will it end up? We don't know, because we don't know who will have the desire or ambition to archive, collate, and recombine those media in a way that creates the same experience. Do you see what I'm saying? It's wonderful to, you know, have those ideas and memories, but not all, it's like theater, right? You have to depend on theater to say, we take the same pieces and we put them out again, but they're new and they're different, and they will not be exactly what you experienced when you first saw it. Am I getting a little out there, perhaps? But
oh, that's exactly what we say in theater. Every show is different.
Yeah, and I think that that's what we have to do, is sort of encourage the ongoing experimentation with that. Like, take these tools, these instruments that our engineer associates, you know, have helped create for us, and make them do things that people remember, that people, you know, go back and say, wow, that thing really, really affected me. That's what the classical Renaissance artists wanted to do. And you can't, you know, hope for any more than that.
I think it's funny you say like the things people remember, and you're talking about classical Renaissance, because my experiences, like, so I lived in Baltimore for years and worked at the Baltimore Image Engineering, and it was actually the youngest brother's idea. He'd want to do this forever, but like I guess like Ray Lewis was retiring, or they were going to the Super Bowl, so he wanted a rotoscope dancing Ray Lewis, and we knew the people at the Marriott and they wanted it too, so we put that up there and it got like millions of hits. And now years go by and I'm like there's like a little Italy with a dessert shop, and some woman wants my autograph because it affected her that much, and that I was the person who made it. It's like I want it to be like so like, you know, enlightening and everything, but the truth is half the time it's just like they saw some image or icon that means a lot to them, but to maybe the greater world it doesn't. But it was definitely a moment of saying, like, a lot of the shows I do, and like talking to all the people who saw the shows that we produce in Baltimore, and then like they knew me and stuff. It's interesting.
They still love that Ray Lewis. There was a pep rally last year and they requested it. And yeah, Joe was like, you know, the dancing Ray Lewis, Nisha made. Get that guy in there. People love that.
So
still.
much better. Like, so the dancing Ray Lewis came with Beyond 2. So it was at the time when Beyond crashed all the time. I drew a couple frames and it crashed. And then I kept losing it. So I literally would draw a frame and save every time. So and it was painful. I think it took so many hours because of the crashing. But yeah, like somebody's got to just redo that. Like it's classic, but it was so rudimentary.
It's the golden standard of rotoscoping done correctly.
Oh, thank you. That's so nice to say.
I also wanted to add, you guys were talking about Vivaldi. I remember we did do a National Cathedral event where I got to do the springtime part. So there's occasionally still some classical music, and that was pretty memorable.
Oh, I'm really happy to hear that. That's it's such a beautiful piece, you know.
The conversation about cell animation, Jenny, reminds me of our days pre-cell animation. We did when we were doing, remember the transformation thing that Fred, you could do with the hard machine, right? What did we call it?
Transmation. It was
Transmation.
It's on his
Transmation.
original.
Yeah. And then I remember we saw that, like, I think it was Laser Media was doing cell animation. And we're going like, holy shit, we better get our act together. And we figured out how to do cell animation, but it was tedious because you had to draw every, right? We had to draw every frame.
And at that time, animators were still in high demand to go make animated movies. So, yeah.
Well, the thing about transmation was that it drew all the intermediate cells automatically because it was interpolating the common points between the two cells. And then the other vectors that you could give it with the hard machine allowed you to make a running person go across the screen with a very small number of cells.
You know, I remember how painstaking that cell animation was when we did The Little Mermaid, because there was a scene where we had to animate Ariel getting her legs.
Yeah.
And every frame, of course, was digitized point by point by point. And I remember we got a message from Disney that the laser outline of Ariel with legs, because it was an outline, was too suggestive and it looked like she was naked.
Mm-hmm.
So on site, Steve Simon, animator at the time, had to digitize out all of the crotch line up to her knees, frame by frame, for several seconds of animation. So he did this for days.
Yeah,
and he had developed a mountain of coffee cups around him, and he had grown a beard, and he had this sullen look in his eyes. And you just look at him. I swear I have a video of this somewhere where he just looked at me and he said, "I'm editing Ariel's crotch." and honest to God, I'll never forget the look in his face. He was psychotic, but I mean, just how far we've come, right?
Yeah, it's fascinating because, like, even so, when you guys did cell by cell, did you do it at 12 frames, or did you go, you didn't do 30, right? You're not crazy, are you?
No, I don't think we ever did that.
Okay.
I don't know who's.
I'm actually background as an animator, so like that's I was really bad at the cell stuff though. That is not my thing. But yeah, like I know, like for animators, like the Richard Williams, guy who made Who Framed Roger Rabbit, he operates on 24s, and then most of the world operates on 12 or 10, and then but all the 3D stuff is 30. So what I run into is making 3D animations and then deciding I need to hand take out something. Actually working with a fine artist who he's like so picky and he wants all this stuff taken out, and then he wants me to somehow create things that went off the canvas, and I don't have the original 3D files. And I'm like, that just doesn't exist. It went off the frame. I can't, and it looks like maybe like a second and a half or very short period. I'm like, that's like 2,000 frames. I can't make it appear for 2,000 frames. It's not there because I don't have the original files for it. But yeah, I feel that painstaking hand editing for sure.
Nisha, that's so funny because, you know, we did a lot of our work before, you know, 3D animation, and before you could take those 3D files and translate them to scannable, you know, file. So we used to call it beeping, because beeping meant you were using a pen on a tablet, tracing an image, and every time you push the pen down, it beeped. And so the artist would have to decide, how many points do I need to put along this line to make this image, you know, the software had not been developed to calculate that.
I still hand digitize for all statics and logos and everything. Obviously it's a lot easier, but I hand digitize and point pull. But so image engineering also absorbed laser force out of Milwaukee. And so there was a generation before me, and the woman's name was Amy Case. She now writes novels or something. She went on with her life. But Amy Case was at the point of like, they was digitizing every day with the tablets, and like you'd make the sketch and put it on the tablet and then do that. So luckily I just get to put the background in the computer and pull points and digitize on that. But yeah, I mean, there's an art to it. I like to be really point efficient and do it by hand for certain things. But then other stuff, it's really fun to let the 3D and like try to get the 3D work. But sometimes you're just like hitting your head up against the wall and you're like, I'm done with the 3D. Bring me back to just making frames and keeping it simple.
One of the things that Fred did for animations and images was he made a monitor that would show you what it would look like driving scanners, where, you know, it wouldn't make sharp corners and things like that. I don't remember if he had a special name for it, but you know, and we would preview things before we would open the shutter, and we would see how what the images would look like distorted by how many points they had or that sort of thing.
That's
he took
amazing.
He took a CRT. He took a video a black and white CRT monitor, ripped the guts out of it, and turned it into a vector display. Because before that, all we had was you could hook up an oscilloscope to the output of whatever your source
And
was.
you know what he called them?
What did he call them, John?
Huh?
What did we? No, you don't remember.
Kenny
either?
just posted it. It was XYTV.
XYTV. Yes. XYTV. That I'm sure Fred came up with
Every
that.
one of them had XYTV, and then it had a assigned number. We had, I don't know, there were probably, Fred went down to, what was the name of the computer store? Eli Heffron's.
Oh, God.
Down there in the Fred van, and he bought every one of those monitors that were all alike that he could get. Brought them back, and like you said, he ripped them out, modified them, put them all back together, added some knobs, couple of switches, all new connectors on the back, and we ended up with XYTVs.
And now they're buried underneath Walgreens.
Maybe.
No,
Jenny has two of them.
Jen says she has some.
They're
That's
on my
super
basement.
cool. So like the XY, so it can look at, can it look at like modern graphics and signals depending on if they're analog or like could
No,
they,
it was
It was analog.
yeah. So if you're sending analog if you're, I don't know,
No,
it's very interesting. Yeah.
If you're beeping,
Yeah.
it'll show you in real time what it will look like when projected with the laser.
I know, which is brilliant. So what year was this around when he did this?
In the early 80s, I would say.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Like the preview window for me is like such a resource. And recently in the past 3 years, I think Bill Benner went through to do some scanner mechanics. So now there's like another preview window that actually does scanner mechanics in it. But that was only a couple of years ago when he actually added one that will show you the softness of the corners and that kind of stuff. I mean, it's freaking brilliant, this XYTV thing. I'm amazed.
Yeah, that was driven by PJ's work, because he was doing a lot of point pulling and getting a lot of attention. And even though it's really not best practices to do point pulling, and it's really discouraged because it's highly dependent on using the exact Galvo set that the artwork was designed on. So it's unlikely to look as good on other projectors. He's still done some really amazing things with it.
But even if you're not point pulling, it does a phenomenal job of showing you if you don't have enough points on your corners to actually make them sharp corners and things like that. So that, while you're drawing, you can actually see, well, I put the point here, but the galvos are only going to make it to here in that particular point in time. So I find it's a fantastically useful tool if you're trying to scan quickly.
I know, and that's what I'm saying. Like in the 80s, they had a version of this. Like, like it's amazing. It's awesome, and that's how art gets put. Oh, and I see Patrick answered Andrea's question about the Flickr. We can talk about Flickr now. I'm sure everybody likes that topic.
Especially those of us with slower scanners.
Yeah, so right now, most people figured out how to split things onto different projectors. So like it started with just individually having objects and splitting them. And then they came out with masking, which I remember when Joe Sully told me about the show Party Animal, was the show that Penguin released to show like masking, the fact that you can put objects in front of each other and whatnot. And that was like a huge revolution for graphics. And I still use a lot of masking, preferably to like exporting things separately and having gaps. But like so that like, it's like, okay, well now you need to make sure every image can be contained by one laser at the scan speed that you're going at. And then, or you push a little too far and you just hope your audience accepts it and you have enough darkness. And then now they released something called distributive scanning, which I was very suspicious of it in the beginning, but it does more than just take points and split them. It also changes, not exactly the refresh rate, but it's like synchronizing the lasers. So that way, because I manually split images all the time for years until they came out with this thing where basically you send the image to a bunch of projectors and the projectors negotiate how many points they're going to project. You have to align them all on top of each other perfectly to do it. But like with the new tools to do the alignment and warping, it's really easy comparatively. So so what's happened now with graphics is you're expecting most graphic shows have like 3 30K projectors, or they're getting the 60K scanner that is only sold by one company or for individual use and put into your projector. So there's a lot of barriers with certain tools where you live in the Penguin Beyond family or like with a certain manufacturer to get certain tools nowadays. But yeah, that's kind of the Flickr story on that, is people found it was cost effective enough to have more scanners, more projectors on shows to get lack of flicker.
Well, that and you get the brightness. I mean, I've got multiple 90K scanners that I can create images with, up to 3 in my environment, and that's it for a really complicated image. It's still without high power, because none of my stuff is high power. It really doesn't. It'll allow you to get a lot of points onto the screen, but it's still not enough, in my opinion. With distributed scanning, you can get the brightness, because each scanner, set is only running at 30K or whatever they're running at, with a significant amount of power behind them. So you get a lot more punch, I would say, out of your assembled graphic. And like you were saying, Nisha, the ability to split the image manually versus, which I've done for a lot of years as well, versus having the software do it. The software is really good at it, and it doesn't distribute the image necessarily like you think, but one assumes that it's the algorithms are there to make it as efficient as possible for each projector.
So I want to point out, if people don't know David, so he's one of the people who are saying, unless you're able to be an individual who integrates himself. So that's why he was able to integrate the faster, mostly used at 60K, but he has it tuned to 90K scanner into his projector. So he integrates his own tools into his own projectors that he builds.
David, if you don't mind, I would just like to show in the background, like as people are talking, a little bit of your home studio. Oh, yeah. I think that people from IEC would be very interested in just what somebody can put together. It's in your attic, right? Literally in your attic.
Yeah, it's in the the third floor of my house. I was spending time in apartments and things like that for years in advance, trying to think of, what would be the ideal home environment to be able to, to laser and do moving head lighting and things like that. Built this room into the roof so that I could get behind all of the walls and above the ceiling so that I could run all the wires and things like that, because, my wife wouldn't have tolerated, wires, cables running everywhere, in what we wanted to be a, also a movie multimedia space and things like that, and an extra bedroom and all of the things that we'd like to do with our spare spaces. So this space environment in it, and it's a heck of a lot of fun.
Wow.
Yeah, no, he's called it the disco attic.
Wow.
I don't know if Patrick has the train video, the one that won an award a couple years, but that's really cool.
Oh, there's so many cool things. And this is what, back in the 70s, I was hoping would happen, that people could just do laser shows in the living room, just like you have a big screen TV. You'd have something like this in your home. It didn't quite work out that way, except for David.
Well, Nish, aren't you running an artistic seminar here in a couple of hours?
Yeah, it's coming up. I mean, I push everybody to like talk, and I made my rounds, and this year has specific people. A couple people told me that they're not ready this year and they'd like to speak next year. So yeah.
I missed the earlier sessions. I'm really looking forward to tonight's part 2, and I'm really dying to see Lyra's presentation on beam brush again. It seems like there's been significant advances there. I haven't turned on a laser in 12 months, so I'm looking forward to seeing how that space has evolved and to get back into it.
Yeah, so I did something different this year. I didn't force people to say you must be at both sessions, because last year I slept through session B because I stayed up all night. So after that, I decided that people should come when they can. So if Lyra comes back, that's wonderful. Otherwise, we have the whole thing recorded. We will be replaying it. I'm going to prioritize anyone who's here and wants to present live and then do the recordings, just because I think that's fair, because some people might have already seen the recordings.
Absolutely,
yeah.
and I'm sure it's getting late for some people.
Yeah.
Yeah, will Christopher be doing that Meow Wolf thing again? That was awesome.
You will be presenting it live, because I told them like there was an opportunity where we had a little bit of time to talk about it, but I figured let's show the whole video and he can have a whole full session, because it was kind of like giving him a small sliver of a session instead of just putting it all in one and having everybody look at it. But it's super cool what Krista.
Yeah, I'll play the video and then answer all questions and expand as people are interested.
Well, after this, we have a sliver of ILDA After Dark, so we're going to watch some laser shows, of course, and then we're going to go straight into artistic, and that is the plan. So
we still have 20 minutes of the reminiscing, which I have thoroughly enjoyed and could sit here for hours. And
well, this is why there are going to be more ILDA After Darks quarterly, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I did find that photo. So when you think about how many projectors were in that attic, this is the Little Mermaid projector, if you guys can see that.
Yeah.
So this is 2 coherent ion lasers. Power supplies are under the bench, but I'm thinking about all the advances that Fred contributed to this. Inside the rack there are his 5061 scanners still screaming away. You've got 6 discrete acousto-optic modulators driven by his RGB drivers in the rack there. So I remember Image was an early pioneer in the use of AO cells for color, and then of course we were able to combine that into single cells later, which saves so much optical loss in the chain. And then in the lower right-hand corner, you've got the Lumia wheels, and I remember again, as an idealist engineer coming to learn out that there's this rack of electronics with all these controls and switches and devices, and then there's this rotating solenoid and this gear motor spinning this thing. And at the end of the day, all of that was there to spin a piece of shower door in front of the lasers to make it schmutzy. So the Little Mermaid underwater sequence, we actually couldn't find a good shower door for it, and we looked everywhere. So we ended up just painting a piece of plexiglass with nail polish, if I remember correctly. But it just killed me that after all of this hand-blown glass and power and water, at the end of the day, the effect is generated by nail polish on plastic. But Fred was behind everything in this thing. And I think I actually have a picture of it. In fact, this is the opening sequence. And this thing, by the way, that just as a quick note on that, the Little Mermaid was just a shove-in show that was meant to fill a gap in MGM theme park for because Muppet Vision was moving, if I remember correctly. And it was only supposed to run, I believe, 10 shows a day for about 5 years. And it was so popular that people were waiting in line for hours and hours outside the park to get in. So they actually added redundant lasers hanging above the table so that if a laser needed to be replaced, they could literally just lower it down on a winch. And they brought in more cast, and they ended up doing 30 shows a day. And it ran for, I don't know, 15 years, 20 years, something crazy. I don't know, it might even still be there. I haven't been there.
Yeah, I know the Little Mermaid because I think back before I worked there, the Sully brothers had to go do something with it or something because it or maybe so it got passed to them. So I always thought they did it, or maybe they added like a blue wave laser or something.
It got replaced completely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It like I just remember them talking about like they made just like a blue wave, and I don't know if that was part of the original install or something they added or changed, but I know they got involved with it because of like taking over the contracts or whatever.
Yeah, that show was wretched excess. They just threw everything they could at it, and then anything they didn't use, they just took out. But the blue wave was meant to look like you were sinking under the ocean. So it was originally a pair of remote scanners on pneumatic lifts, and once the beams started, the fan started, it would just slowly rise, and there would be little droplets of water sprinkled through it on the audience to make it feel like you were sinking beneath the ocean, because droplets of water, of course, is the same as drowning, I guess. But nonetheless, it was a spectacular effect, and it was a nice volumetric effect. And one of the amazing things about Disney that we learned at the time was that they were so concerned about maintenance. One of the things you don't want to have to do is climb up into all that crazy scenery to clean off a mirror. So they actually had us put little tubes inside every one of those scanners feeding liquid, nitrogen from a LN tank somewhere outside that was the size of a house. Right. And it just blew clean air on them all the time. I mean, crazy.
Yeah, Disney is crazy. So the person who was at Image before me, so it's like they took it, and then there was the people from Laser Force and like Amy Case and Carl, and then then I don't know if there was another gap, but then there was this woman named Janelle, and then I was under her, and then Sally was under me. So this whole thing is like Janelle kind of left and nobody really knew what she could do. She goes and she works for Disney, and now she works for Meow Wolf. So she's like taken but she told me a little bit about how like they would have meetings about like video projector, like what video projector to use on something. And they would test like 20 projectors. She said, it's just ridiculous, Nisha. You wouldn't even understand how much they go through to be one of the park Imagineers and different things. And yeah, it's really interesting. And now that experience can carry over to Meow Wolf, which you're going to see if you stick around for the artistic seminar, a little bit of what Meow Wolf Denver is like. They're a collective that originally was in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and now they have different areas that I think the IEC people will really be interested in.
But Nisha, if you want to know crazy, you should ask Rob about the Lucas Live shows that were never seen in the United States, but there it is. Rob fabricated laser pistols, or what do you call them, laser rifles, whatever they were.
Oh, it wasn't just me. There was a bunch of us. It was.
Oh, well, yes.
And one of Fred's core technologies was at the heart of that. We needed to energize a few dozen real laser guns in soccer stadium size arenas in Japan. So we fiber fed these epoxy rifles. This was the first prototype, so it has nothing in it. But so it had a fiber fed beam in it, and then it had an infrared digital transmitter, and as well as a small laser sight as well. So you had to find a target in the scenery, hold on it for a quarter second to make sure that you weren't just whisking in front of the audience, and then it would let a tiny little burst of light out, and it would send a signal to the show control guys to let the 150,000 watt ka-chung sound effect go out, and then another signal to another show control guy to make an explosion happen. And the Japanese crew members thought it was real, like they thought we were shooting real laser guns because it was so well timed and perfect. But we couldn't figure out initially how to get the beams to be so carefully rationed from the common ion sources into all those fibers. And Fred Fenning had designed this thing called the beam controller, which was this little device that just stored precise points of light. And then it basically just took care of turning the light off, scooting over to the next point, turning it back on. So you could create beam shows in air and target mirrors without having to have individual trim pots for every single point. And we actually used that beam controller to target fiber sources in the bench. So instead of targeting in the air, it was actually targeting the inputs of 100 micron fibers. He never intended it for use that way, but it worked beautifully.
That's super, super cool. Oh, man.
I'm sure there are still people who want working laser guns out there somewhere.
Well, now with all the banding thing, like you saw, I think it was the innovative application where that guy, they did it in camera where he like had the beam floating there or whatever. I know one thing the Suleys did a long time ago, because they had a poster in their office when it was still AET. They fiber fed some lightsabers. Did you guys ever have to do laser lightsabers?
Yeah, the Lucas, we tried probably 50 different things working with the prop guys, because the Lucas Live Tour was owned by Kenneth Feld. So all of the Ringling Brothers and Disney on Ice people were there. So we tried everything from pulling socks off of, UV paint to you name it. And there really weren't any good remote sources. So we fiber fed polycarbonate tubes and, just worked on making them durable, because the guys who were fighting had to actually hit each other. And there were pyro packs inside their outfits. So when Luke hit Darth, it actually sparked out of his costume. And they also had to fly because there were foil rigs on the thing. So they'd fly with the sabers, and it became kind of a nightmare trying to not get tangled in the fibers.
There's
Obviously,
a guy
a
on
lot easier to
YouTube
do
called
now.
Styropyro. He makes a bunch of stuff from diodes, and he has an actual laser gun.
Jenny, do you
It's
remember
like an 8-pack.
at laser displays in the 70s, we were supposed to make something for a traveling rock show called Thor, God of Thunder, and he had a magic helmet and a magic hammer, and the tour got canceled. Do you remember any of that, Jenny?
I'm sorry. I'm afraid in my basement. There's so much in my basement.
You have Thor's hammer?
No, almost. There is a vinyl record cover of
Thor, the
Thor
muscle
in
man.
his costume with his two, wolf dogs.
Dobermans.
Why did I end up with that? But I think that was one project that never resulted in an actual show that actually functioned, but it was quite the character.
I think maybe our next meeting should be in your basement.
I'll just have to drag the stuff out and plug it in and make sure it works. Yeah.
George just brought me this from our garage, which is apparently a lot like your basement.
Oh, geez.
This is the heater control for the Fred van.
Right. Yep.
So
I have the keys for the Fred van in
Wow.
my desk, where he put part of the ignition system on a connector. And so that if you took it out, you didn't have a complete ignition system. And
wow, so ahead of his time.
Fred had the very first fob for any car. Because
Yes.
without that being plugged in, you couldn't start the Fred van. Not that you would be able to drive it if you started it anyway, but.
Yeah.
So Patrick, so does ILDA have the resources to have the, you know, the history of laser devices exhibit in, I don't know, London? I guess it's a lot to ship to London, but we should do something.
There's a guy in Phoenix, Arizona, who has an immense collection of lasers.
So Carl or Todd? Or who else?
I don't remember his name. Sorry.
Well, a lot of people are in Arizona. There's Carl Rothwell, there's Todd Rogers, there's Casey Stack. Carl.
I'll find him. I'll find him and put it up here on the screen. But the short answer is no, we don't have the resources for that. I would love to. When I was young, I had a friend who was an architect, and for her project, we had her do the Museum of Laser Art and Holography on the Mall in Washington, D.C., which never got built for some reason, but her master's project or whatever.
Didn't ILDA have a history committee at one point? I think, what's his name from Ohio was chair of that.
We kind of have a history committee, but there's no real commitment to it. At some point, we should be publishing a thick book on the history of lasers. This is a thick book that just came out on how to do laser shows and effects, which Richard co-wrote, who's on here right now. But yeah, we need.
Well, honestly, like the thing about ILDA, it's there are financial resource limitations, but it's mostly time of members and lack of membership issues. Like, I mean, my big thing is when you look at the large companies, most of the large companies are not part of ILDA. You know, a lot of the large laser companies in the US left. And also speaking about the UK and laser history, they have their own laser history. Laser Creations was over there, and I'm sure they have their own stuff. That is the history over on that side, just like there was the history here.
It's not entirely true. I think that the bigger issue, at least as far as membership is concerned, is that most production houses now are so diversified that they don't just only do laser, or their dominant effect is laser.
That's a good point. Most of them, the big ones, have had to become special effects companies. Lasers are a part of what they do.
Even if it's a part of like the people, because they have a department then, and when you meet the people in the laser department, they're just as diehard as if they were a laser only company.
True that, yeah.
Yeah. And then they find diehard people for the other effects too, or people who just love festivals and shooting off cryo, which I think is very silly. CO2 effects. I don't know how that became popular.
It's cheap.
The comment about laser creations in London made me remember, and Jenny, help me out here. I remember flying to London with just the optical table. I think we built it just for this event. It was because we had the color modulation technology, right? The color mixing technology with the piezoelectric crystals, whatever they're called. But Laser Creations provided the lasers. And I remember just me, I think I might have taken this thing in my luggage. I don't remember, but went over there, and on the Thames, it was for the public offering of British Airways, and projecting onto this like barge, this graphics. We just did graphics, but I think it was Laser Creations had the lasers, big Spectra 171s or something, Argon. And what was that? Remember that woman who was the holography expert friend of Steve? What's his name's at MIT? Eve Richard, Eve somebody.
Yeah.
And she sold this laser show to British Airways.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I have other history about Eve Richard, but well, that goes back to and I guess we'll have to do this too, because prior to image engineering, I was involved in 2 other laser, companies starting out. But I think what Nisha just said is actually important, and it's not that different from other industries where there are special, specialties or focuses. And there are associations for, or guilds even, for the people who really work on that inside a larger environment. And I'm not sure exactly what I'm saying, but to say that, you know, for ILDA to find a way to get support from those larger special effects or production companies that take advantage of this resource and this technology, there should be a way for them to sponsor their employees to be members, to, you know, give them the resources to build their skills there. Because if anything I've gotten out of tonight, it's that out of the last 25 years when I've been off doing whatever else, a whole lot has gone on, and there are, you know, careers and skills and achievements happening here that, you know, ought to be recognized. We're somehow, somehow I feel like I want to encourage people to say that you're not just in an isolated, narrow realm here. You're part of a big picture, and being visible to that industry will help, you know, everybody thrive.
This is true, but the thing is, just like back in the day, we were talking about like where people would like hide their projectors and keep people away. There's just as much fights, pettiness, and division as there is like this good stuff that we get at ILDA. So the people who left decided they can do it on their own, or they're working on something else, or whatever they're doing, they just don't, they're not getting the camaraderie that they want out of ILDA, whatever it is. But yeah, it's sad, and I don't fault them. Let's put it that way. They are also making great work and making great strides for our industry, but they just don't want to be part of the association.
It's because it's highly competitive, and there's a lot of dollars involved and a lot of proprietary information, and it's awkward to not share it. And at the same time, you can't share it. DNA, you know, NDAs are a lot of what is involved, and I don't know. I agree with your take on it pretty much, Nisha.
Yeah, but it's not, I mean, from everybody I've talked to, it's slightly personal in some way. Like, it's not like they all joined ILDA and they liked the idea of it. But it came out that, you know, well, do I really want to spend the money on this if I could go do shows, or am I really getting, and the one thing I think would be valuable for every laserist, whether they're an ILDA member or not, is, I told Patrick about this when we were in Dubai, I think on the safari, we need a laser family tree. And it's a family tree in that, who were you under, where did it come from? And we find that, and if even, you know, the IEC people were to talk about where did their inspirations to get into lasers come from, and then we'll all find out we're all connected. You know, the people in the last so many years who've been seeing Christopher Short's shows, like I've been just talking with laser cube users, and some of the IEC people might not know about the laser cube, but it is a this big 2.5 watt, now it's on Wi-Fi, battery powered laser.
Slightly bigger than a Rubik's Cube.
Yeah, I actually could probably, no, I think it's in the basement. I can't unpack it, but
Nisha, about the family tree, Casey Stack quite a few years back had started one. I don't know where it ended up or what's come of it, but
I have heard that, but we need to extend, because that, I'm sure he doesn't have like my generation or the generation, like usually it's always 19-year-old boys that start in this industry, you know. It is, and they think they're like cowboys of the Wild West, and they want to do their EDM shows, or they want to do whatever and be cool, and then they build these companies and they amass these lasers, and they're business people now, and here they are in their 20s and 30s, or maybe they started touring and then they go here. But like, it's an interesting, it's something where I don't think that the younger people have a sense of history. I only have a sense of history because I worked at the old image engineering, and my owners had a sense of history. if I just picked up lasers because I thought they were cool and started a company, I would have no idea how it was connected to everybody else, and how like my actions and my art like also relate with everybody else.
I,
Nisha,
I would
I have a-
agree
I
with
have
that.
a,
And I do know that I stand on the shoulders of giants. I'm heavy into Lumia, as you can see in the background. And as you can see in the background, that is bilateral Lumia. That's not special effect. That's what the Lumia looks like. And my question is, did Laserium or any of the other precursors ever figure out how to do this? Yeah, there's a laser cube that Richard has.
Yeah.
Right here.
That's pretty amazing. So, but
It's
anyway.
the 1 watt version.
Yeah.
1 watt version.
You can open the aperture. It's not on. We can look in it. But yeah, it's damn amazing.
David was showing his too.
Oh, who else got? Oh, David's got one too. These
Yeah,
things
David.
are.
Yeah,
they're
here's one.
People are going on TikTok and buying a laser and getting their variants and stuff to use it for all sorts of things that nobody I could have even imagined, because they don't even come from a laser background. There's like musicians and performance artists and marketing people and like anybody you can imagine, like laser for laymen kind of thing. It's very weird.
So Nisha, I want to respond to that, as thoughtful as I can, to say, on the one hand, it's not unfamiliar. I honestly think that the same and cautions affected the first ILDA meetings that I recall, of like, how much do we share? How much do we protect? What are we keeping proprietary and what are we? But I also know, both from tonight and from my own long-term experience, that it's kind of a community builders that make the difference there, right? And we talked about Fred all night about this, because essentially that's what he did. He encouraged people, he connected them, he made us all feel supported. And not everyone is going to respond, right? It's an issue for any organization, but I think you're seeing potential here. And I think your idea of a kind of a, family tree or network does make people feel they're connected to something that is lasting and meaningful. And I'm absolutely happy to contribute to that. I think there's probably a lot more than I don't even know, but
I think ILDA's
kind of,
making a move from being competitive competitors to being collaborative in the last, I don't know, 6-8 years. And I think we really needed to go in that direction. And I like seeing all the younger people that are getting involved, and artistics, a lot more artists. And of course, we still welcome the big companies. We crave them in a way. It would really help to have their sponsorship and also their vast experience and interesting things. But I really love that we have so many individuals and smaller individual members. They really, anyway, I like to think of it as a collaborative experience.
Yeah, I developed this bilateral stuff, and if you stick around till 8 o'clock, I have a slideshow showing how it was done. I thought about, now, should I keep this a secret, or should I maybe share it out there? And I decided, yeah, I'm an artist. I'm not really competing with the bigger companies. I will show how it is done. If somebody else wants to do it, more power to them, or maybe they'll want to hire me to do it. Who knows? Anyway, I'm putting it out there pretty much as open source. And it's essentially a modification of the standard Lumia that we've all come to know and love over the years. But anyway, stick around till 8 o'clock and you'll see how it's done.
Yeah, and that's one thing I wanted to address. Mike brought up a really, really good point. So like earlier we were talking about the laser banding and like, kind of Adam LaBay, who I believe Precision Lasers is a member, but he was not able to attend. Well, yeah, he did submit awards, but like the thing is, people still hire Adam LaBay to go to their shows if they're doing laser banding, even with their own equipment. And he knows more about it and is constantly driving to do cooler things with it because he started in one place and he's just further along than everybody else. So I think there is that in the industry, like people who are friendly, who are pushing boundaries, and then big companies will invite them to work on certain shows with them. So the client gets the best show at the end of the day if they have like a specialized thing. And Mike's point is really good. He specialized in Lumia. If you have a Lumia show, you could try to make it happen. I mean, Image, we did one while I was there. I didn't know Mike at the time. Otherwise, I would have automatically said, why aren't we consulting Mike Gould? Like, you know, like at the time I was in my little, like my shell. It was in my like second year. It was the Germany ILDA year. So like, I didn't meet Mike. I didn't know anybody. But as I've grown out and like met a lot of people, it's like, I try to push people who are not connected to go talk to other people, because that's like a bond there. And then there's a bond of trust. And I honestly feel so inspired coming to these conferences. Like, it's hard every day to go and program laser shows for the masses. And then when you get to see what other people get to do for the masses and how everybody just loves it, you're like, well, I guess I'll go try to make a little bit of this show, little push it a little further and do something I've never done before.
I'm sorry, Nisha and everyone, we need to wrap up. We are actually into the time for our next thing. Now, everyone is welcome to stay. We would be delighted to have all of our IEC and Fenning family friends to stay if you want, but we are going to shift gears now and go into what we call ILDA After Dark. And then in a little less than 1 hour from now, Nisha will be running the artistic seminar. She will have the spotlight again. And again, you're welcome to stay as long as you can take it. But I just want to thank everyone for coming and just say it's been a memorable evening for all of us, I think. Okay.
Thank you so much for putting this and for the award and inviting us, because it was really wonderful. And Fred would have loved it too.
You're very welcome.
Well, not the end.
It was fabulous. Thank you, Patrick.
Okay.
Thank you for inviting me.
Good night, friends.
Appreciate it.
Okay, you can stay if you want. We're just shifting gears a little bit to do a little bit more of, hey, let's take a look at some laser shows and things. So here we go. I'm going to stop the recording.